Baghdad ruled the world. Now, we're discussing caliphates. And the first dynasty to rule the caliphate were the Umayyads. The Umayyads ran an Arab state, a state set up by Arabs, for Arabs, controlling a vast empire. However, that empire was probably 99% non-Arab and probably 98% non-Muslim. Non-Arabs, non-Muslims were discriminated against. Non-Arab Muslims were discriminated against. It was also a Sunni state. So even among the Arab Muslims, there was discontent rising among the Shia Muslims. Now, in such a large empire with such a small base of governance, it was naturally not terribly stable forever. And far in the east, far away from the capital of the Umayyads in Damascus and Syria, a man named Abu Muslim, former slave, would come to begin a rebellion. He raised the black flag of revolt, the black flag of jihad. And he set out with the plan to place a member of the family of the Prophet Muhammad in charge of the entire caliphate. Naturally, this would give him strong support among the Shia community. He also had strong support in this rebellion among the Mawali, that is, the freedmen and descendants of former slaves and converts to Islam, that is, the non-Arab Muslims. Now, they started this rebellion in Khorasan. Khorasan is almost the farthest province to the northwest on the border of Iran, Afghanistan, and Uzbekistan today. And there, the initial rebellion would begin among Persian converts to Islam and among the Shia, as well as the Arab tribes who had settled in this far province. Even many non-Muslims, Zoroastrians and Buddhists, joined the revolt. And they were successful. They began moving westward from Khorasan. And within a very short time, by April 750, they had captured all of Iran, Iraq, entering Syria, and even reaching the city of Damascus itself. In this Damascus, Abu Muslim ordered the entire Umayyad royal family to be put to death. One of the Umayyad princes, Abdurrahman, escaped the massacre. He fled to the west. His mother had been a Berber, so he found support among his maternal relations there and would settle in Spain, where his descendants would continue to show up, but we'll leave them for now. Now, by the time they'd captured Damascus, Abu Muslim had already found a caliph, As-Saffah. And As-Saffah was the great-grandson of Al-Abbas. Al-Abbas had been a brother of Abu Talib and Abdullah, the father of Muhammad. So As-Saffah was the first cousin, twice removed, of Muhammad. And he becomes the first caliph of the second great dynasty, the Abbasids. Now, having been brought to power by Abu Muslim, As-Safa promptly has Abu Muslim executed because Abu Muslim thought he could remain the power behind the throne using As-Safa as his puppet. As-Safa realizing that having someone so powerful trying to pull string, someone who had already brought down one dynasty, was not a good thing for himself or his family. So Abu Muslim had to go. Al-Safa only remains as caliph for 5 years, when he would be followed by his brother, Al-Mansur. Al-Mansur made a very, very important decision. He decided to move the capital, the Islamic Caliphate, away from Damascus to a brand new city, Baghdad, built on the banks of the Tigris, close to the former Persian capital, Ctesiphon, far from any frontiers or enemies, unlike Damascus, which was not terribly far from the Byzantine frontier, and much closer to the Abbasid base of support in Persia. This new city would grow rapidly. Here is a reconstruction of what it would have looked like in its first century. It was a round city. In the center was a mosque and the palace of the caliph, with roads going off like spokes from a wheel in every direction. Gradually, the city expanded to fill the entire round area and spreading out in every direction, even crossing over the Tigris. And within perhaps 50 years from the time it was founded, Baghdad had grown to be a city of over 1 million people, making it the largest city in the world. And it was not just the largest, but probably the wealthiest city in the world in those years. Their culture, literature, law, and so on would flourish until the city was destroyed by the Mongols 500 years later. But before then, it became a place of legends, some of which many of you probably have heard. Now, Al-Mansur's followed by his son and then his grandson. His grandson, Harun al-Rashid, is probably one of the most famous caliphs of all, ruled from about 786 to 809. His mother was a woman named Al-Qaisarun. Al-Qaisarun was a slave from southern Arabia. From the time of Harun al-Rashid on, most caliphs would be born to enslaved women rather than to free women, which we'll get into some of the interesting things about that. Al-Qaisarun, it has been suggested, is the inspiration for the character of Scheherazade, the woman who tells the stories in the 1001 Nights. I don't know if anybody has familiarity with that, but the story is that the caliph in Baghdad gets married every day to a different woman, or rather, he takes a new woman, slave, to his bedroom, and if she does not satisfy him adequately, he has her executed in the morning. Knowing this, Scheherazade comes up with a cunning plan to prevent her own execution. She tells him a story, and just when it gets to the most exciting point, she says, "Oh, that's where I have to end, and we'll continue it tomorrow." So she survives another day. She does this for 1001 nights, and the stories she tells are those of that collection. Many of them we may have heard: Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, Sinbad the Sailor, Aladdin, so on and so forth. Now, Harun appears in those same stories, and his Baghdad in his time is the setting for most of those stories. Harun al-Rashid's vizier, that is his chief minister, was a man named Yahya the Barmakid. Yahya, after he died, was followed as chief vizier by his son Jafar. Jafar is a character in a Disney film, though was not an evil sorcerer. And, you know, there were no flying carpets or genies in bottles in Harun's actual court, but it had many of those sorts of, great wealth that occur in those stories. Now, under Harun, the caliphate began losing some of its frontier areas. So, in many ways, this is the very peak of the Islamic Empire. Harun and his son, Al-Mamun, established a place called the House of Wisdom, the Beit al-Hakum. This was a library and a center of research. It rapidly became the largest collection of books in the world. Their books were translated into Arabic from Greek, Syriac, Persian, Chinese, Sanskrit, Latin, all of the languages that were in use at the time. And these especially looked at scientific, medical, philosophical works on geography, astronomy, things like that. Much of what we know, for instance, of Greek science comes to us through Arabic translations made in the time of Harun al-Rashid. There is quite a lot of work done with mathematics. One of the ideas brought from India at this time is the zero, or zifr in Arabic. Zifr and place value, along with those other 9 numbers that are properly called Indo-Arabic numbers, will of course make mathematics much easier. Soon, a fellow named Al-Khwarizmi will write a book called Algebra, developing algebra and algorithms. A lot of our mathematics will come from Baghdad under the Abbasids. Accounting becomes possible once these new numbers arrive. To understand how revolutionary this is, try to multiply 173 by 95 using Roman numerals. Try to count over 1,000 using Roman numerals. Now try doing it with Arabic numerals. You can do it with one. It is almost impossible with the other. Other developments will include massive works of philosophy and law, gatherings of all the sayings that have been passed down and attributed to Muhammad, histories like Al-Tabari's 37-volume history of the world, many, many, many works, books on things like lives of famous singers, lives of the great merchants, histories, stories like the 1001 Nights, poems. Many, many, many things come to be written down because that invention of paper brought back from Central Asia by the Arab armies that have defeated the Chinese make books so much cheaper. There is a catalog of books available in one collection in Baghdad around the year 900. It is something like 35,000 titles. the same time, there is a list of books available in Constantinople. It is about 3,000 titles. There is a list of books available in one of the largest libraries in Western Europe. It is about 400 titles. The amount of knowledge available in Baghdad in the 9th and 10th centuries is unrivaled to anything that has come before. It is not just knowledge in writing, but experience from all parts of the world that bring things to Baghdad. Baghdad becomes the center of trade throughout Europe, Asia, and Africa. Trade routes from all directions come together there in central Iraq. Southern Iraq in this period is one of the most intensively developed areas. The farming of southern Iraq creates enormous amount of wealth all on its own. The trade passing through Baghdad, everything makes it incredibly prosperous. Ceramics, pottery dishes from Abbasid Iraq have been found from Eastern China to Western Europe, from Scandinavia to Tanzania, and everywhere in between. Coins throughout the same vast area. The coins of the Abbasids are the standard money. Textiles made in Iraq, and to a lesser extent Egypt and Iran, will dominate markets throughout the world. And this trade is bringing in areas that had formerly not really been part of the greater global community. Trade expands throughout the Indian Ocean, down further and further southward to Mozambique and Madagascar, through the new Muslim towns all along the east coast of Africa, trading across to India, onwards to Indonesia and the Spice Islands, practically to New Guinea, northwards up to China and Japan. At the same time, on the northern side, the Vikings will emerge as raiders and merchants, and the great market that they are serving is ultimately that of Iraq and Baghdad itself. Now, this much more integrated world also sees the spread of many crops that had only previously been known in smaller areas. For instance, durum wheat or hard wheat, winter wheat, had first appeared, a spontaneous mutation in a field in Egypt, time of Justinian. Under the Arabs, durum wheat will spread to North Africa, and from North Africa to Spain and Sicily and onwards to Italy. It will be carried to Central Asia and on to China. Durum wheat is something which we might not necessarily have heard of, but unlike the softer wheat that had previously been grown, durum wheat makes it possible to make pasta and noodles. And whether you're in China or in Italy, noodles are spread by Abbasid farmers, cooks. Rice appears in the Mediterranean, begins to be grown in massive amounts. In Spain, it is carried south of the Sahara into West Africa. Sorghum, watermelons, eggplants, and spinach are brought from India and spread into Africa, Europe. Citrus fruits come from China and the Far East and are brought first to the Middle East and then carried on to North Africa and Spain, where we get new developments like oranges and tangerines. Tangerines are from Morocco, as the name actually tells us. Mangoes, bananas, coconuts, plantains, and then two crops that are of particular interest: um, sugar and cotton. Cotton had been domesticated in India. It had been known and outside of India as something exported as finished cloth from India. Right around the time that Islam appears, cotton begins to be grown in southern Iraq, in Jordan, and within a few centuries, cotton is spreading around the Mediterranean. And cotton, whether from Egypt or Syria or Spain, makes for much lighter and more comfortable clothing. It changes how people dress. Many of the types of cotton cloth still have names that show that they have come via the Arab Middle East to us, like gauze, which means cloth from Gaza, muslin from Mosul in Iraq, and so on and so forth. The other is sugar. And sugarcane, was known in ancient times as something that came from India. It's called sweet salt. It was incredibly expensive. Right around the year 600, it begins to be cultivated to a small extent in Iraq and Iran. When Heraclius captured the Persian palace, one of the great treasures he brought back was a wagon full of sugar. Sugar, up to this point, had been more valuable than its weight in gold in Constantinople. Now, sugar begins to spread, and sugar cultivation spreads through southern Iraq into Syria, Palestine, and Egypt in the next few centuries. From there, it makes a very interesting journey that we will come back to in a few weeks. There is also new technology, new theories of land management that increase the amount of food that can be grown on the same land. Technology like these water wheels called norias, built in the Middle Ages and at least until a few years ago, still operational in Syria. Water wheels will be taken by the Arabs to Spain. They will spread from Spain into Europe. They'll also be spread throughout all of the lands under Muslim dominance. These new technologies, these new crops allow for an enormous increase in population because there's more food and a rising standard of living. There will also be some interesting developments in the labor system, as we shall see next.